Hello, I'm Brett Walker, an agribusiness specialist with the Excel Group. We're in a situation here today with our crop insurance that we need to make some decisions. We're going to present some information to you today on prevented planting and replanting to help you make some better agronomic decisions for your crop. On the screen behind me, you will see the appropriate dates for the final planting date for crops in specific states. If your crop is not listed there or your state, please contact us and we can get you that information. For most of our customers in Iowa, the prevented planting date or final planting date for corn is May 31st. Beans is June 15th and seed corn is May 25th. If you have not been able to plant by those dates, you have a decision to make. You can either continue to plant the insured crop through the late planting period, which is June 25th for corn, July 10th for soybean. If you've been unable to plant your crop as of May 31st, corn specifically, you have a choice. Continue to plant or look at a prevented planting option. If you choose to take the prevented planting option, the first thing you need to do is file a prevented planting claim within 72 hours of making that decision. That is critical in this process. If you decide to continue to plant, you have through June 25th to complete your planting of that crop. If you decide to continue to plant through the late planting period, your coverage is reduced by 1% per day. For example, if you plant corn on June 10th, your overall coverage is reduced by 10%. If you decide to plant your corn after the late planting period or June 25th, your coverage will be reduced to 55% of your original guarantee. Soybeans will be 60% of your original guarantee after July 10th on soybeans. And your full premium is due just as if there were no prevented planting issues. Here is the official definition of prevented planting. As you can see on the screen, it came right directly from the handbook, so read through that to see if that fits your situation. Prevented planting is generally defined as the inability to plant your crop. There are some things that you need to consider as you are considering taking a prevented planting option. First of all, is it prevalent in the area? Previously, we've had some issues where people maybe took prevented planting as a financial option, but was not prevalent in the area. Those parameters are going to be a little tighter this time around, so be sure that it is prevalent in your area. You also need to have the inputs purchased for those prevented planting acres, and you will also need to have had the manpower and the machinery to adequately perform the tasks needed to be done. So if you have any question at all, please contact us. We'll get an adjuster involved and try and make that determination in a timely fashion. To qualify for a prevented planting payment, obviously you need to have eligible acres, and the acreage in question needs to be at least 20% or 20 acres of your unit structure. Most of us are on an enterprise unit structure, so all of the corn acres, for example, in a county would be added together to determine a unit. So if I have 1,000 acres of corn in the county, all I need is 20 acres to qualify for a prevented planting payment. These acres do not need to be contiguous. You could have 3 acres in one field, 5 acres in another, 12 acres in another field, and you add them together to get to your 20-acre qualification. So just because you have one field with a few acres in it or several fields with a few, add them together to get to your minimum requirement. Again, you need to make sure if you're on an optional unit structure, it's going to be on a section by section basis. So that qualification may be more on the 20% side versus the 20-acre rule. So just make sure you're checking with us as you meet that rule. The other thing that you need to be aware of is that you have to have eligible acres. So to determine your eligible acres, it is the highest planting of that crop in the last 4 years. For example, if I've planted 1,000 acres of corn in 2017, and that's my highest of the last 4 years, those would be my most eligible acres. Acres not eligible for prevented planting is really only one category. It's new break written agreements. So if you've had a farm maybe coming out of CRP or you've plowed up a pasture, those acres are not going to be eligible for prevented planting. There's also policies out here that are area-based plans, such as margin protection or area plans. These do not have prevented planting options in them also. As I've explained, when determining your prevent plant acres, we first need to look at the eligibility. So your highest planted acreage of the last 4 years, then we need to look at the number of acres that you've already planted to determine what you have left as a prevented planting option. So in this example, we've got the history of the last 4 years, and in this example, we've already planted 200 acres. So our highest planting in the last 4 years has been 400, less our 200 acres of planting, leaves us 200 acres of eligibility. Our original intention was to plant 300 acres of corn, therefore we're going to have a prevent plant payment of 100 acres. So you really need to concentrate on, first of all, your eligibility and how many acres you have planted to that point. If you've run out of eligibility, your prevented planted acres are simply rolled to the next available crop. So in Iowa, that's generally going to be soybeans. If we're prevented planting, we can always roll to that next crop. If you're a new producer in the county, you would need to have filed an intended acreage report at sales closing date to have eligible prevented planting acres. If you have used history from a previous producer, if you've been involved in the operation, you automatically get the prevented planting acres from that previous history. So please check with us or check with your agent to see what your eligible acres are in those situations. If you've happened to added another county to your operation where you haven't previously farmed, you have 10 days from adding that county to file an intended acreage report, and that will establish some prevented planting acres in that county. If you have that situation, please let us know. If you have a field, let's say you've already started planting soybeans in that field and you got rained out halfway through and you want to take prevent planting corn on that field, that is not eligible. It will roll, the prevented planting will roll to the crop that has been planted in that field. Now, there is one situation that you can have a split field. If you have split field history on that farm in the last 4 years, then you may be eligible for prevented planting corn in that field. If you're in a situation where you need to add eligible acres to your operation because of increased acreage in 2018, there is a mechanism in place to do that. You simply divide your new acres by your highest previous acres and determine an increasing payment factor, multiply that by your eligible acres to produce your new eligible acres. As you can see in this example, we've increased his corn planting acres by 33.4 and his soybean acres by roughly 50.1. So do the math based on this calculation and you'll come out with your new eligible acres. Contact us, we can help you walk through that. A little bit in review, and it's always good to, I want to reiterate this point in that acres that are not eligible for prevented planting, you have to meet that 20-20 rule, 20 acres or 20%. Acres that are coming out of a CRP program or a wetland program, some type of ground that has not been previously planted in the last 3 years for whatever reason is not going to be eligible for prevented planting acres. So in a situation where you have planted the first crop and let's say it has been drowned out, you have a couple of options there. You can use the replant option, or you may be eligible to use the first crop, second crop option. So you can go into a previously planted field, plant an alternative crop, and still have your coverage on your first crop. Due to market circumstances, you might consider planting a second crop on a prevented planting field. If you do that, make sure that you're contacting your agent so that you can thoroughly examine all the ramifications and possibilities that go along with this. For example, if you prevent plant corn and you decide to plant soybeans on that, prevent plant payment will be reduced to 35%, and you will receive a 60% plug yield on the corn crop as almost a penalty for planting the second crop. But you are eligible to plant soybeans on those acres after the late planting period of corn, which is June 25th. Now keep in mind that if you plant those soybeans, they are already 10 days past the late planting period for soybeans, so your coverage on soybeans will also be reduced by 10%. So consider your options, make sure you're making the best economic decision for yourself, but make sure that you know all the ramifications of what you're doing. So we've decided to take prevent plant on our corn. What do we do with those fallow acres? Generally, it's going to be a good idea to plant a cover crop on those, and there is an approved list at your local USDA office of what those approved cover crops are. Some have let those acres go fallow. Make sure that you're talking to an agronomist or an agronomic expert to understand the ramifications of letting those acres stay fallow. But cover crops are generally a good idea to put on there. If you decide to plant a cover crop, there are some options available there also. You may not hay or graze that cover crop until after November 1st. If you hay or graze it before then, your prevent plant payment will be reduced by 65%. So be careful when you're haying and grazing if that's an option that you're going to do. Another topic that we need to address is replant. If you are going to replant something, please contact your agent first and talk to an adjuster. You need to have that contact made before anything happens in the field. Do not attempt to replant or tear up that crop before you've talked to an adjuster. You need to have 20 acres or 20%, same as the prevented planting rule, to qualify for a replant payment. Replant payment on corn is 8 bushels times the spring price, or roughly $30, or on soybeans, it's 3 bushels times the spring price, or roughly $25. So those are the indemnities that would be paid on a replant that qualifies based on the 2020 rule.